temptations, the daughters of Maya that tempted the Buddha to not sit under the Bodhi tree, and so on and so forth. And Christ went for his 40 days in the desert and was tempted by the devil and taken upon a high mountain and promised all the world that he would, you know, and all this business. And, you know, Christian tradition talks about original sin, or a sense of separation from this presence. And yet, even though there are all these distractions along the way, there's something innate in us, isn't there, that yearns for this presence, that knows that this is our home. And when we meet somebody else who radiates this presence, we feel it, because the presence in us knows that presence. It recognizes it. It's like, you know, I was adopted, and well, it's a long story, but my birth mother was a very young woman and couldn't keep my brother and I. We were twins. And so she put us up for adoption. It was all set up before we were even born. And then after she had us, she married somebody else, not our father, and had other children and so on. And at one point, these children, these other children, these half-brothers and sisters, looked me up, some of them. So there they were standing in front of me, and I could recognize myself in them. I could see in their eyes, I could see in the shape of their face and their nose and their hair and their, you know, I could see this similarity. And that's the way this presence is. When we see it, we recognize it. Because it's in us. It's who we are. That's why, like, we put a lot of these. I was just talking to John Troy before this, and we were talking about how people take somebody who's realized this presence and they put them up on this giant pedestal. And then they make all kinds of maybe even theological declarations about them. And they, you know, and this exists in any tradition you can find it. It's in Christianity, it's in Hinduism, it's in Buddhism, it's in all of them, you know. But Jesus, Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, all these people are just people. You know? They're just people like you and like me. And they recognize this presence in themselves. And then we put them up on this pedestal and call them divine incarnations. Well, we're all divine incarnations. I don't take away from it. I don't say, oh no, they're not divine. Sure, they're divine, but so are you and so am I. We're all divine. And that's what these people were pointing to with their lives and within their teachings. If we really read between the lines and we don't kind of divinize it all and make it into this special thing that's somehow light years away from our experience. That presence that they woke up to is the same presence that's present when you take your garbage out. The same exact presence. No different. And yet there is this resistance, and it is a mystery. And I guess ultimately I'd say, I don't know. I don't know why that is. It's a mystery to me, too. Or like when I saw this finally and I thought, how could I not have seen this? That was the one question. But you just keep looking and eventually you see it, just like looking for those olives. You look long enough and hard enough. They're there, so you're bound to see them eventually. I don't know if that addresses.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trip.
So last night, my father decided to take his life, and it was unusual because he was completely mentally competent. He was like he was a 35-year-old man. And so he was very methodical, and we had a last conversation with each of his children, and so that 30-minute conversation was so amazingly poignant. It was as though every conversation we'd had before that had been just a careless sort of mixing together of paint and just kind of throwing it up on the story of our lives together. But it was like my father was dipping this brush in this divinity, and each word that he spoke, I was so attuned to. It was like a out-of-my-body experience to hear the last words of my father. Every word that I shared with him was just like that, and it was beautiful, and it was as though this picture was painted over this light of divinity, of love, and of, you know, shared recognition of how much we loved each other. just occurs to me that, like, what you shared tonight, that shift that takes place in all of us when we are blessed and we're kissed by the divine with this realization of how beautiful and divine this ordinary moment of now is. It was just like that. It's that shift that can take place where you suddenly are able to deeply appreciate someone or something that you took for granted. And I just think that your whole talk tonight is reminiscent of that conversation I had last night with my father.
Thank you for sharing such a sacred thing with us. It's really beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's the same presence. It's always the same presence. In every sacred moment that we experience, and every time the veil is lifted, and we see that shining glory in such a wonderful, sort of unique experience of the death of someone. I've been at many deaths as a hospice chaplain, many, and often at a death, just like you described, it's like the veil is lifted for a moment, and we see the celestial world. We see this whole different realm that's always here, but we just don't pay attention most of the time. And then it's lifted, and we see that love between people that in this mysterious way we're brought together in this life, and lives touch like a father and a son, and how glorious and mysterious and wonderful that those kind of things are. And even now in this moment, just a simple talk in a place in the middle of North Carolina, and this divine presence is right here for us and with us and in us, as us. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Just follow up on the resonance of words at certain times and how each of us can hear something and it's just the right thing to resonate with us.
Mm-hmm.
I regret so much that the word love has been spread so thinly in our culture that it no longer has any depth or any dimensions. And when I hear it, it falls flat for me. It doesn't connect with anything deeper. Is there anything you could say about that to kind of deepen what the qualities and nature of that is that we keep referring to by that word?
Well, yeah, just try to feel the reality beneath words. Words aren't a big deal. Like, words don't matter that much. But, you know, and a person can talk about love till they're blue in the face, and a lot of us say I love you very easily and all that. But when you have a human life that radiates the kind of love that prayer, Radiating Christ, talks about, then that love is palpable. You can feel that love. It flows. It radiates. It shines. And the important thing is to live this stuff. Talk is cheap, as they say. You know, we can talk and talk and talk, and many of us do. But if we live this from our hearts and embody this, then divinity itself shines into the world through these just ordinary human lives. And it's such a great grace and a gift. And it's just like that prayer says, not only in my words, not only in what I say, let me preach you without preaching, not by words alone, but by my example. And then there's these phrases that follow, by the catching force, by the sympathetic influence of what I do, by the evident fullness of the love, there's that word, my heart bears toward you. So when love is full and real and authentic, it just shines. And it doesn't matter what you call it, or it doesn't matter if you speak. You know? I think we're so used to focusing on words and thinking that words are it, that we get hung up on words. And if one word doesn't work for you, then throw it out and use another word. You know, like I use a lot of words that don't work for a lot of people in this whole non-dual spiritual thing. You know, I talk about God and Christ, and you know, and that just doesn't work for some people. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't bother me. It's like, okay, that's who I am. Don't expect me to not use those words, because those are my words. Those are the words I use. But if they don't work for you, then use other words. If the word love doesn't work for you, then stop talking about love and just love. and then you'll get the meaning of love, and then it will just wake up in you, and it will be very real, and then it won't matter if you talk about it or not, you know. My dad, he was somebody who didn't say the word love very much at all, but when he died, I knew that he loved me. I knew that my dad loved me, and I still know that my dad loved me. He's been gone since 1999. And he wasn't perfect, you know, he had his warts and stuff, but the love that he gave to me was so real that I never doubted it for a moment. But he never was one to go around saying he loved me all the time. Every now and then he would. But when he waited to say it for special events, it really was special then. You know, I'll never forget when I went to the monastery, and he said, well, I went to their house like right before I left. A friend was going to drive me down there. And I was 22 years old, you know, really young. And I went to their house, and my dad said, well, you know, I just want you to know before you leave that if you ever decide to leave, you can always come back here. And I hadn't lived there anyway for several years, you know. But he said, you can always come back here because you know that your mom and I love you. And I'll never forget that. You know, he's this big, tough guy. He didn't go around saying he loved me every 5 minutes. But I knew that he loved me, so it didn't matter. And like you say, you know, talk is cheap. It's easy to say love, 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 love. But let's live love. If we become love, then that's when we'll bring love into the world. And that's when the word might take on a better meaning, the meaning it maybe used to have for us. I don't know if that addresses what you're saying. Yeah, Jeff.
Can you talk about the process of coming to your particular form of sacred service, you know, the way that you embody it?
About the way I embody it now?
Or how anybody would, how would they, you know,
well, it's different for everyone. I think it's what your heart inclines to. It's like, it will be put into your heart how you are to serve the suffering Christ in the world. Something will touch your heart. It might be rescuing greyhounds. You know, that's a beautiful, no really, I mean, these precious creatures, you know, that are hurting and that need rescuing. Or it might be helping homeless people, or it might be reading to a blind person, or it might be tutoring a child, or it might be visiting your aunt who's dying of cancer. You know, I mean, your heart will be inspired to do what you need to do. And a lot of people that work with me make a commitment. I really ask people if they'll make a commitment to at least once a month do some form of selfless service. And you'd be surprised how awakening that can be. So many people get on a spiritual journey and they're so focused on themselves and their little experiences and this and that. And experiences are fine, and they come and go, and some of them are amazing. And believe me, I've had every experience in the book over the years, you know, in terms of spiritual experiences. But every experience comes and every experience goes. And if we're just focused on having special experiences, we can really get off the track. We can really become very self-centered. And I think that this, trying to see the presence in someone else, in something else, in all beings that cross our path. It's a practice that you see in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Judaism, and all. You know, in Buddhism they talk about seeing the Buddha everywhere, you know. In Christianity, Mother Teresa talked about seeing Christ in his distressing disguise. And finding Christ in his distressing disguise and serving that Christ and loving that Christ. And if you want to worship, there's worship for you. You know, put your love for God into living action. You know, find somebody who's suffering. Find somebody who needs your love. Somebody who enters your circle of influence. And love them. Just love them. Very simple. It doesn't have to be some big complicated project, you know, solving world hunger or something. You can just be going shopping for the old lady that lives in the apartment across from you. You know, Something very simple like that. Does that sort of... Yeah, I don't assign things to people or anything. I try to get people to just look into their heart and say, you know, what does your heart incline you toward? What do you get sort of sad about? What is it that you see on the news or hear about that makes you want to reach out and touch someone and help someone? And then just find a way to do that. Find a way to express that in your heart. You know, God put that into your heart for some reason. There's some longing in your heart to do something for, you know, others. And the odd thing is what you discover is when you do that is that there are no others. You really start to get that this presence that I'm serving in this person that's suffering is the same presence. The presence in me is serving the presence in them. That's why I feel a longing to do that. And I think that's an important practice. It's one I really do emphasize. And I've lost people over that. A number. People start working with me and they love all the contemplative stuff and they love all the surrender stuff. And then I get into the selfless service and I never see them again. And some people have a real resistance to that. I find it interesting, but they do. And I think it's a shame because it's really a heart-opening practice. It can open your heart to go to a homeless shelter just even once a month and feed people and just let yourself allow that kind of a life to walk into your life can be really heart-opening and life-changing for you. And you have to experience it to really realize what I'm talking about, but I'm sure a lot of you have. And it's just a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful practice. And it's a very deep practice. It's not just a do-gooder thing. It's really a practice that will bring you to a realization of this presence in every being that crosses your path. And that's part of realization. It's not just coming to realize I am the self. I am, you know, but the self is in everything. All these forms, all these people, all these beings that cross my path every day. The self is in them. They are the self as well as me. So I love that practice. It's a really important practice. Yeah, did you?
I think it's really important to honor that process of purification and to be really open to, let's say, the shadow. And I'm sure you've gone through this and you've spoken of it, but I think there's often a tendency to skip over that. And bringing the presence into that, all the darkness that we often carry with us, is, I think, has been for me a real practice.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the things I've seen with so many spiritual teachers is going up here and not going through that kind of purification of the body and the personality and working through all their childhood stuff. And, you know, almost every spiritual teacher that's come to the United States has gotten in trouble. You know, guns and drugs and women and alcohol. And why is that?
Yeah.
And my answer is they haven't done the shadow side work, which leads you to the light. But if you don't really honor that, then I always distrust that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm very, I mean, anybody who works with me knows that I'm certainly not a person that tries to encourage people to evade their humanity. Yeah. At all. And I haven't evaded mine. I mean, even though I've been in a monastery my whole life, like a lot of people would say, oh, he's led a very sheltered life, you know. I went to seminary at 18, I went to the Trappist when I was 22, you know, I never smoked a cigarette, I've never been drunk, I never, you know. There's a lot of things I haven't done. But when you go into solitude, you really face your demons. All the demons come out of the woodwork. And you see that the worst stuff people do anywhere, that all that's in me too. You know? Yeah, the light is at the very core of my being. But on the surface level, there's a lot of stuff. that can be there. It's not the deepest, most profound level of who you are. We think of it as deep in some ways psychologically and so on. But really, on the level of being, it's actually on the surface, these things, these dark creatures. But you're right, I mean, the light shines. You know, if you go looking for darkness with a flashlight, you're not going to find it, are you? Because the flashlight illuminates the darkness. And this presence is like almost like a divine alchemy. Everything it shines on, it turns to gold. And even these dark places in us, these places of grasping, these places of fear, these places of anger and absolute rage, when they're brought into, consciously brought, they're already in, everything's in this presence. But when they're consciously allowed to exist in it, the presence itself transmutes them and heals them. But we have to allow them to come into the presence. And that's something I do actually work with people a lot on. But it's not something that you can kind of go into in depth in a talk. Because it's also very individual, you know, all these things. That's why I really do stress too, and I hope I never lose this. I'm sure I won't. But I think you have to be willing to work with people individually. If you're called to do this kind of work, you have to. It's like if a doctor, if you're called to be a doctor, you don't like rent out Madison Square Garden, and get up on stage and say, okay, I'm a great doctor. All of you eat an apple every day. Drink water, a lot of water, and eat lots of good food, and get plenty of sleep. You know, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Those are great things. If everybody does that, they'll be better off. But a real doctor has to meet with people individually and say, okay, let me examine you. Let me find out what's not working here. And let me give you the proper medicine. And let me give you the proper prescription. And let me tell you how many times a day you need to take that. And what else you need to do in terms of diet and exercise and all these things. And I think it's the same with the spiritual life. And if you're going to try to help guide people, you have to work with people individually. And a lot of this kind of fine-tuning of stuff and like you say, shadow work and things like that, you can call it different. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And you can look at it in different ways. It's essentially the same thing. It's just letting the light of God come into all these dark places, all these nooks and crannies, and shine the light there and illuminate the darkness and let it leave. Allow it to go. But you have to accept. There was an image that a Buddhist monk who I really admire a lot named Ajahn Sumedho, who's a man from Washington State, who went into the Thai lineage of Ajahn Chah and ordained, and then he was one of the founders of the monastery in England, Amaravati, which means the deathless realm. And he talked about we all have this dank kind of prison in our psyche, and all these prisoners that we poked down in there and told them, stay in that dark place, don't come up, don't come up. And we get a stick and we poke them down and we don't let them come up. Because they're ugly and they're disturbing. And we don't like them. We don't like the way they look. You know? So we poke them down. But he said, you know, when you come into the practice of mindfulness, which is really basically a kind of practice of acknowledging this open, absolutely, unconditionally open awareness, you have to allow that to be aware even of those aspects of the psyche that are so dark. And he said, so you turn on the light, you open the doors, and you let the light shine into this prison. And you leave the doors open. And you say to the inmates, you know, okay, come up into the sun. You know, come out into the daylight. You're welcome to leave. You don't have to stay down there. And then that brings real healing. So these are aspects that are important. And, you know, I see all too often, I see in this whole non-dual spiritual scene, a denial of our humanity. Some people talk about, what's that word they use? Mohammed would know this one. Bypassing, spiritual bypassing. Where they don't want to acknowledge any of the messy human stuff, you know. But awakening to this divinity does not automatically neutralize all that. You know, that stuff is still there. We need to acknowledge it. We need to transcend it. We need to realize that we're not merely that. You know, I'm not the sum of my past mistakes. But I need to acknowledge that those are there and bring them into the light and let them heal. Because if I just push them down and deny them, they're not going to heal. And they're going to come back up and bite you in the butt, so to say. Because that's the nature of that. If you don't face the darkness, it'll come back around and get you. So I really thank you for bringing that up, because that's a very important point.
And in my experience, it's also necessary to have at least a glimpse of the light
Yeah.
to be able to work with the darkness.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Otherwise, you're just stirring the pot.
Yeah. You get them angry, those guys. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a very important point, and I really appreciate you bringing it up, because it's something it's part of the spiritual journey. And if you're going to work with somebody in a deep way, a teacher, a mentor, a guide, whatever name you want to give it, I don't mind calling myself a teacher or a guide, or, you know, let's just be real here. I mean, if you're working with people individually and you're trying to guide them spiritually, well, then that's what you're doing. So you might as well admit it. This business of, you know, people teaching but not wanting to be called a teacher, it's like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? I'll call you Mickey Mouse if you want. But I mean, you know, you're doing what you're doing, so you might as well acknowledge it. And I think it's important and helpful, especially when you get on that level, to work with somebody who's been there and done that, who's been through that, and they know the territory, and they know that it's painful, and they know it's hard, and they're good listeners, and they can create a space with the consciousness that they abide in that's accepting of everything. You know, when after this happened to me, and I would be doing pastoral counseling with people, which I did a lot of, and people would come in with the deepest, darkest stuff, you know, I mean, especially like when you're doing hospice ministry, people are dying, so they want to get stuff off their chest, and they tell you the most, like, amazingly dark stuff sometimes. And yet, what my experience of that was that this presence just filled the whole room. And it was like there was this huge, vast space that could allow all this dank, dark stuff. And there was like no judgment. And even now, when I meet people, I don't really feel a sense of judgment about things, or I don't feel a sense of kind of discriminating about things, or thinking, oh, they did that, how awful, or blah, 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 or, you know, all these kind of commentaries about it. There's just a sense of spaciousness. Like when I do sessions with people on Skype or in person or whatever, on retreats, there's just this vast, and the deeper and darker it is, the more painful it is, it seems like the vastness gets vaster. It's like it just gets big enough to hold whatever comes. And there's something that transmutes it. Like I've actually seen that, people on deathbeds telling me these dark things, and there's this vast spaciousness that just receives it. And like you say, and it heals it. There can be a healing that happens. They're just, you know, they've never shared it with maybe a soul. You know, people on their deathbed have told me they've killed people. I've heard horrible things, that you would just curl your hair. And yet there's this sense of this vast, and it's, I call it the ear of God, you know. It's the ear of God that just hears everything, that listens. It just listens to the pain of the world. Or like the Sacred Heart of Jesus, it's like, that's an image for me that's really beautiful. That this heart that's just exposed and open in his chest, you know. And it's just this raw heart. Oops. It's just this raw heart that's open and exposed. And it's like feeling and very sensitive to all the pain of the world, and yet it's not overwhelmed by the pain of the world. It allows it, it embraces it, and it transmutes it. So, very important point. Thank you. Somebody there was...
I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit more about what you've been talking about when people on their deathbeds, for example, explain the dark things they've done. I was just wondering, what happened if it was really extreme? What if somebody was like Hitler, or someone who was a serial killer?
Never had Hitler.
But how? But, you know, you're talking about seeing Christ in others. If you would encounter that, how would that work? How would that be accommodated in this view? it seems like you have encountered some of that. Just wonder if you could explain.
I've encountered some pretty dark things, let me tell you. I don't know, there's something about the nature of this consciousness that it's just all-inclusive. It's unconditionally open. So when you abide in that, that judgment just isn't in that. It understands on some deep level that at the core of everyone is this consciousness. And even though it's covered over, it's like if you gave somebody the Hope Diamond and it was all covered in mud, but you'd seen it and you knew that the Hope Diamond was there, and they had it just looked like a big turd or something, just this big brown thing covered with mud. And yet you would know, because you know what it is. You know it's the diamond is underneath there. It's like that. It's, I know on a human level where we judge and we decide this is good, this is bad, this is pretty, this is ugly. We do that. But this consciousness that I'm pointing to, it doesn't do that. It's unconditionally loving. That's what they talk about, God being love. That's
I wonder if
what
that's
they
what you
mean.
mean by the grace of God then.
Grace.
That-
It is grace. It's gracious. It's absolutely open. And it understands too that when people do ugly things, when people do hateful things, they do it because they're looking for love. They do it because they're looking for happiness. And they don't know where to find it. And they do these horrible things with some kind of warped idea that it's going to make them happy. And what's felt is compassion. It's not judgment. But it's not me. It's not like, well, that's Francis, he's this loving guy. No, it's that consciousness. That consciousness is absolutely unconditionally open. I call it openness a lot lately. Just pure openness. And I know that's not very satisfying on a human level, because on a human level we do, oh, that's atrocious, that's an atrocious person, they did this and that.
Well, I think you could just say it's lack of fear. The openness. It's like lack of fear. If you're present with someone like you're mentioning and you're not in fear,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's what everybody needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. True.
So Francis, I'm one of those people that give you crap on Facebook.
No, you never did.
And I have to say you take a hit really well. You're very kind and you don't unfriend anybody. So.
Oh, I unfriend people all the time.
Yeah.
If people start causing trouble, and I think that they're pulling down the spirit of the... Because, I'm not on Facebook to get into philosophical discussions. I'll just all of you that are here, I'll just so you know. I'm not on Facebook to get into philosophical arguments. I'm not on Facebook to talk about where I went to supper. I'm not on Facebook to talk about the latest movie I saw, or who I'm dating, or where I'm going on vacation. I'm on Facebook because God told me to get on Facebook. In my heart, I felt that it was something that I need to do, and through my publisher. My publisher said, you got this book coming out, you don't even have a website, you got to get on Facebook at least. And so I got on Facebook, and right after I got on Facebook, I just started getting inspired to write. And so I just post these things, and I just do it for inspiration. So if it inspires somebody, I'm happy. If it doesn't, that's fine. There's plenty of Facebook pages you can look at. If mine doesn't inspire you, then don't stay on it and argue with me about how it doesn't inspire you. Just go to another one, I won't be offended at all, I promise you. But anyway, were you going to say something about it? More? I just like...
Yeah, so I want to ask the same question, but I want to ask it in a more loving way, because I was triggered by something you wrote, and so I came at you kind of, sharply. But there was a moment for me that was profoundly deepening in my own process of coming home to myself, and it was when I started to make the assumption that I am the one itself. I'm not Trip, I'm actually the one itself, appearing paradoxically or mysteriously as Trip, but that distinction, that shift of assuming I am the one with no second, rather than contextualizing myself as a person with the light of God within me, it was extremely important in my ripening. And I noticed in the conceptualizing and the nomenclature that you use, you talk about the light in someone. Is this distinction that was profound for me just kind of semantical, or could you comment on that? Because to me, there's a kind of having your cake and eating it too, in allowing yourself to conceptualize yourself as a person within whom the light shines. It's as though you want to personally receive the benefits of divinity when you actually are already the owner of everything going down. You know? And so that little fine distinction to me seems to be crucial, but maybe I'm hung up on it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think I remember the phrase that you were taking issue with. It was something that's on my website, basically. It says, God is in everything, everything is in God.
Yeah.
But see, for me, what you were hearing, the first part only, you were saying, oh, he's saying God is in everything, so he's sort of separating him. But then I said, everything is in God. You could equally say, God is everything. Or you could say, everything is God. It's the same thing, but they're just words pointing. I mean, the important thing is the realization of that. That absolutely everything appears in this vast, spacious awareness, which is God. So Tripp, Francis, John, Carolyn, everybody, everything appears in this vastness. And this vastness appears as everything. But it is semantics, I think. I mean, it is. You know, and I'm at a point in my own journey and in my own work and stuff where words just are not, I can't get real excited about words. I mean, I love words on one level. I actually, most of my life, I was a very kind of literary person who read a lot, and I write a lot. I write every day, and I'm writing another book. I wrote one book, I write on Facebook, I write. I love to write. I used to write poetry. I love words in one way, and I love crafting words, and I just think words are beautiful, and I love the way they point. And yet I see that words don't get it either. And one thing that sort of puzzles me about the non-dual spiritual world is that so many people are so freaking hung up on words. It's like, if you don't say a word just so, then they just like jump on you, you know. You used a personal pronoun, you know, or you said other, or you know, I get people making all these little distinctions about words, and I'm always feeling like, just feel what's behind the words. That's what I try to do with people when I do sessions and work with people, or do retreats, and people are talking, and I don't immediately just take whatever words they use and try and figure, oh, my definition of that word is the only way that word can be used, and if they don't use it that way, then they're wrong, or that's what they mean when they use that word. And see, both those are assumptions that just aren't true, I don't think, for a lot of people. Because we all have our own little personal experiences of life, and so we all have different associations with words. And different words point differently for different people. And some words don't point at all for some people. Like the God word, you know, that points beautifully for me. But I didn't grow up, even though I grew up Catholic, I had this loving, loving mom who was very, you know, wonderful. And I never had this image of God as this, you know, like big ogre, or this big pissed off guy in the sky. He's going to zap everybody, you know. I had this idea God was love. So I grew up with that. And so when I hear God, I had this close feeling with my father and this great love with my father. So like when I hear the word of Father God or Mother God even, I have good associations with father and mother, so I don't have, but not everybody does, and I recognize that. I don't, you know. So, I don't know. I mean, like with you, I feel so, I mean, you're my brother. Even though I never met you, I just felt that with you right away, like when we first connected on Skype and everything, and you know, and we're very different guys. I mean, we come from different places, and we've had different experiences. But the love and the presence that's in you recognizes the presence in me, and the presence in me recognizes the presence in you, and it's all fine, you know. So if we have some little thing, you know, I'm not going to unfriend you. Is that? Yeah.
I guess I do have this thing about words. I meet pretty regularly with a fellow who is very much, has studied the Bible a lot. He's very Christian. But we share, I come from a non-dualistic perspective, we share so much until we get to God, like everything is God, as you said, which is my perspective. And God is everything. But then when he says, or he makes that, like there's a separation, God is in everything. For him, that creates a separation, that there's still a God outside of him that he has to pray to. So, you know, it's just that for me, or for him, we can say the same words, but when I say God is everything, he can't say that. He can say God is in everything, but doesn't see himself as that as well. It's like, it's heresy for him to say that he is God, or that...
Do you love him?
Do I love him? Sure I do. I mean...
Does he love you?
Yeah, I mean, we're people who, like he says, I'd make a good Christian. And I tell him he'd make a great Buddhist. And because we share so much, and then there's that separation.
Do you love him?
He's a friend.
But you love him.
I respect him.
It sounds like you love him. And it sounds like he loves you, so there's no problem. You just love each other.
Right.
And how you talk about all this stuff, you know, more and more, I don't care. I just don't care anymore. And I don't even care if somebody's a non-dual person, or a dual person, or a Christian, or a Buddhist, or a no-self, or a self, or a, you know, it's like, for me, it's like if they have a radiant heart of love that shines into the world, then I'm behind them, 100%. And I just, you know, like I go to churches and talk to, sometimes I go to churches in my own area and talk to these senior luncheons. Where there's this, people have roped me into this, you know, but I like it. I love older people because I worked with a lot of older people in hospice and stuff. And I just go there and talk about Christ and the love of Christ and sharing the love of Christ in the world. And they love me and they feel it. And they say, oh, please come back and talk. You know, and they're absolutely dualistic, and God is out there in heaven, and they're praying to him. And I love the heck out of them. They're just beautiful. And they love me, and it's no problem. You know, all this philosophy and all this terminology and theology, and I don't, you know, I'm just less and less concerned with all that. I share sort of what's in my heart, and I hope it radiates into the world. And I'm less and less focused on words all the time. And I notice even in retreats I'm using less and less words. And like my talks all the time, they just get more and more simple. I think they couldn't get more simple. And then I do a talk and I went to Fairfield one time and I did this talk and I kept thinking, I sound like a 5-year-old. And there were all these people that, like Rick Archer, my friend Rick is there, and he was into TM, and they, you know, all these TM dudes, they all study like Advaita and Vedanta and Shankara, and they can quote, you know, Adi Shankara and the Bhagavad Gita and all the Upanishads and blah, 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 and they go on, they can quote all this stuff. And like I could do that with Thomas Aquinas and Christian stuff, but I couldn't do that with that. And I thought, boy, I must sound like an imbecile to these people. I'm just getting up talking about the presence of love in our hearts and things like that. And they're probably just thinking, oh, this guy's like really, you know, doesn't get it. But more and more, I just find myself getting more and more simple. And what really matters to me is the radiance of this love. And I think that's what matters. Yeah. And so I just can't get... That's why on Facebook some people, I mean, and I know they mean well and God love them, you know. But people get on there and they get into all these technical things with me, and I just check out of it anymore. I'm just like, knock yourselves out. I'm gonna go walk in the park. Knock yourselves out. And I just let them go at it. Then I come back and look at it and they're still going at it. It's like, okay. Every now and then I interject something, but I don't have the heart for philosophical debate. And I have a degree in philosophy, so I could do it, like, but I just, I'm not interested in it anymore. It just doesn't turn me on. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I'm just saying, instead of like feeling, and I get a lot of people say that, you know, they have a friend that is this or that, or their parent, or their whatever. I had a lady recently talk about her mother's this like good Catholic lady that goes to Mass every day. She couldn't get her to kind of get that she is God. Is like, who cares? You know? She's going to Mass, saying her rosary and loving people, then she's fine. Let her go.
Yeah.
So, anybody else have anything? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to respond to the question of why I think we resist the presence. I mean, I've been, quote, feeling the presence since I was a child, and it almost seems like the older I get, the more resistance I feel to it. And I'm going to be perfectly honest about this. We can have our own personal agendas, but when we surrender to presence, our lives are often moved in directions that are quite different from what we thought our personal agendas were.
That's for sure.
And what I've found is that no matter how scary or shocking or whatever the shift is, that the process of surrendering to whatever is happening transforms into something deeply meaningful, and I'm going to use the word glorious because that's what it can feel like sometimes. Sometimes the consequences for me personally of surrendering, allowing myself to go through a process which can be very supportive and serving in many ways. I also may require a period of recovery from that. Maybe if I was more perfect, that wouldn't be necessary, but it's almost like there's a cycle in my life where I can be very, very out there and serving, and then there are times when I need to go into retreat. And I'm not just talking for a weekend. This may be weeks or months, where I really need to focus on my own self-care, peace, quiet, contemplation, inner work. So I think that Spirit will guide us where we need to be when we need to be there. And sometimes we're on the front lines, and sometimes we're on retreat. And that can be under the guidance of Spirit. But I think there is a resistance in my life, so I can only speak for myself sometimes, because no matter how wonderful it turns out, historically, I'm like, oh God, what does Spirit want me to do now? And there, you know, I think being a human being and knowing what may be entailed in serving Spirit, sometimes I resist going there. And so I just want to say this one last thing, that your emphasis on the spaciousness is really, really helping me to realize that the times I've had the most profound outcomes in my life, no matter how apparently difficult or traumatic a situation was, that's when I had the greatest outcomes, when I was being the most spacious and allowing the greatest spaciousness. So that's really helpful to me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and that's the practice, is to kind of intentionally allowing. The reality that when you realize is that that spaciousness is always there. Whether I allow it or not, it's there. It's even so spacious, it's allowing my not allowing it. You know? It's spacious enough to handle that. So it's just like infinitely spacious. And that's what the intentional practice of surrender brings us to that finally, that realization that, oh, at the core of my being, I am surrender already. It's already there. So we, in a way, practices are not a doing. They're a kind of sinking into being on some level. Like a lot of people say, oh, there's nobody to do the practice. It's like, well, okay. But, you know, just sink into the beingness of who you really are on the deepest level. That is the practice. It's a being more than a doing. Sinking into this spaciousness. It's always present. Even in you, it's always present. Even when you're not spacious, feeling. The spaciousness is holding that. Thank you for sharing.
And the spaciousness is what we are.
Yes.
And as radical acceptance of everything.
Yeah.
Rick and I were talking earlier today, there are two great miracles. There's the first miracle that we are present, not the form that appears in presence. The second miracle is that anything is, and it affirms that. The more we are acceptance, the more we are as presence of the space of the room, the more we allow thy will to be done and accept thy will, whatever that is, and let it play as it will. That's two miracles. The practices that you're referencing here, I'm finding drops us off into the non-physical and non-form presence within which the presence plays as more acceptance, then the more thy will becomes self-evident as everything. Acceptance is accepting everything, and including our own self, including all those little dark corners that turn to gold dust when they're inspected. That's radical acceptance.
Yeah.
Is what we are, is what we share, is God.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's 9:35, so I'm thinking that we're coming to the end of our evening. Is that about correct for those who are the keepers of the clocks? But I really want to thank you all for coming. And it's wonderful to meet you all. And I hope I see you again somewhere in my journeys. And so, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.